People who've escaped a cult, what horrifying secrets did you discover? I was 14 when Father Silas called my name during morning prayer and said I'd been chosen for the harvest, and everyone around me started crying tears of joy while I felt my stomach drop because my brother Matthias had been chosen 3 years ago, and I hadn't seen him since he walked through that red door. The harvest ceremony happened every autumn at our compound, where 50 of us children lived in what we called the Garden of Divine Purpose, and every year 3 or 4 teenagers would be selected to transcend their earthly bodies and join the ascended ones in eternal paradise. Or at least that's what Father Silas told us when we'd gather in the main hall and watch our siblings disappear forever. I remember being 7 years old and asking Mother Deborah why the chosen ones never came back to visit, and she slapped me so hard my ear rang for 3 days, saying that questioning God's plan was the first step toward corruption and damnation. We weren't allowed to speak the names of the harvested children after they left, because Father Silas said their earthly identities had been shed like snakeskin, and they existed now as pure light and energy in service to the divine. But sometimes late at night I'd whisper Matthias's name into my pillow and wonder if he could hear me from paradise. The compound sat deep in the forest, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire that Father Silas said protected us from the corrupted world beyond. But I'd always wondered why paradise needed fences and locks, and why the gates only opened outward, never inward, and why none of the adults ever seemed to leave even for supplies. 3 other children were chosen with me that year, and I remember their faces going pale when Father Silas called their names during the selection ceremony, because everyone knew being chosen was supposed to be an honor, but none of us looked honored. We looked terrified. Naomi was 15 and had the most beautiful singing voice, and she'd led our evening hymns since she was 10 years old. And when Father Silas placed his hand on her head to bless her, I saw her flinch like she'd been struck. Thomas was 16 and could recite every verse of the sacred texts from memory, and he'd always been Father Silas's favorite during lessons. But now he stared at the red door with this expression like he was looking at his own grave. Little Iris was only 12 years old, and that scared me most because the harvest usually took teenagers. But Father Silas said she had an old soul ready to transcend, and when her name was called, she started crying so hard that Mother Deborah had to carry her out of the hall. We were taken immediately after the ceremony to the purification chambers beneath the main building, and I'd never been down there before because only the chosen ones entered those rooms, and I remember the smell hitting me first, something chemical and metallic that made my eyes water and my throat close up. Mother Deborah separated us into individual cells that were maybe 6 feet by 8 feet with concrete floors and a single cot and a bucket in the corner, and she said we'd spend the next 7 days preparing our vessels for transcendence through fasting and meditation and sacred medicines. The sacred medicines came 3 times a day in the form of white pills that Mother Deborah would watch us swallow, and at first I took them obediently, because I'd never questioned the compound's rules in my entire life, but within an hour of taking that first dose, I felt like I was floating outside my own body. Everything seemed distant and unimportant, and when Mother Deborah came back to measure my arms and legs with a fabric tape, I couldn't even feel confused about why she needed my measurements because the pills made all my questions feel fuzzy and irrelevant. She wrote numbers in a leather journal, muttering under her breath about compatibility and market value and optimal harvest timing, and those words should have terrified me, but they just drifted past my drugged consciousness like leaves on water. On the second day, she brought this machine with her that she pressed against my chest and abdomen, and I could hear beeping sounds and see green lines on a small screen,